PTSD typically comprises three things: what are called intrusion symptoms, flashbacks, stuff like that. Avoidance, so they're like patterns of behavior where you avoid reminders of the event, and it shatters people's sense of predictability and coherence. So I mentioned already being female, having a history of previous psychological difficulties, presence of adversity in childhood. The lowest predictor, by the way, seems to be education level. Age itself seems to be a risk factor. One of the strongest ones seems to be actually having a lack of social support. But some other interesting risk factors revolve around things like identity. So people are inclined to, and obviously they'll say something terrible happened. And the second thing that they might say is that, PTSD is caused by having intense fear at the time that something terrible happens. PTSD is not actually the automatic reaction that people think it is to something terrible happening. Neither of those two things actually holds particularly true. It seems to be that a lot of things are at play, and it's kind of a combination of those things in a way that results in PTSD. So the more of those risk factors you have, the more likely showing PTSD increases. Some people refer to it as kind of more simple PTSD. An event happens and you go on to develop PTSD because of whatever risk factors you have. Something called complex PTSD. And complex PTSD, in a sense, is the effect of multiple traumas. If you follow a evidence-based approach to psychological intervention, the evidence is that actually a trauma-focused CBT model tends to do a very good job. If you are a member of a group, if you believe that bad things continuously happen to your group, is something that always happens to us, like us as a group, that's also now has been identified as a risk factor for PTSD. But it is also pretty clear that the opposite is true as well. So social identity works both ways. If the group that you belong to has not been associated with recurrent trauma, that becomes a protective factor. One of the ways in which you'd have to answer that question would be, well, what is the kind of remission rate associated with PTSD? If a PTSD lasts longer than 6 to 9 months, the probability of it lasting a lot longer is high. The tactic you'd kind of have to take is, well, how have you been living with this for so long? What strategies have you adopted, have worked, and what ones aren't working for you? But what you do tend to see with PTSD is, particularly among men, high rates of comorbidity, in particular with things like substance abuse. It's essentially become intrinsic to the person. But not only the symptoms, but actually the methods in which people are coping with those symptoms. So my focus, I suppose, would be on, what have you been trying to do with these things?